18 days. That's all it took for this story to go from a polished global message to a head-scratching contradiction. Count them yourself, then ask whether a timeline that truly honored the principle announced in Geneva would really look like this. On one side, Meghan at the World Health Organization in Geneva, standing beside the Director General and warning a room packed with global health leaders that children are quietly being transformed into content by relentless algorithms engineered to capture and monetize their attention. Built by systems designed to maximize engagement while pushing nearly every other concern aside. The stage was right. The message was right. The audience was right. The cause was right. Everything seemed perfectly aligned. Then came the twist. Just 18 days later, Meghan's Instagram featured her youngest daughter's 5th birthday, complete with 2 fresh photographs shared with 5 million followers on the very platform she had only recently described as dangerous. The comments section was conveniently switched off, leaving no room for public pushback beneath the post. And waiting in the wings? A carefully prepared statement already sitting with Newsweek the day before those photographs officially appeared.
Shameless grifters! This is a new low. Harry and Meghan have been blasted for their wild hypocrisy in doing speeches around the world about the dangers of the internet and social media, particularly regarding children, while splashing photographs of Archie and Lily all over social media.
Tonight, we're unpacking those 18 days piece by piece. The Geneva speech and what was actually said, the carefully prepared defense that surfaced before the photographs, the one stubborn fact that throws that defense into chaos when 2 newspaper descriptions of the very same image are placed side by side, and the striking contrast that landed on that same Thursday afternoon without anyone in Montecito planning or controlling it. But first, let's revisit what she actually said in Geneva, because the exact words matter, and the details matter even more. This was World Health Assembly Week, the annual gathering where health ministers from every WHO member nation come together to tackle some of the most urgent global health challenges. Behind Meghan's appearance stood a memorial display featuring 50 illuminated light boxes, each symbolizing a child harmed by life online. This wasn't a casual photo opportunity or another celebrity appearance attached to a broad, feel-good cause. This was a major public health platform filled with serious decision-makers carrying serious responsibilities. And right at the center of it all was Meghan, standing beside the Director General as the cameras captured every moment.
This is totally bonkers. Meghan Markle has decided to use the 5th birthday of her own daughter to lash out while claiming to be the hero for protecting children from social media. We see you, Meghan, and your angry statement ain't going to shut us up.
She spoke about relentless algorithms and the way engagement gets squeezed for every possible click. She warned that children are being exposed to content they never searched for, never requested, and never agreed to see, all while being shaped by systems they do not understand and cannot realistically escape. Her message was simple: children should be protected by design, not left to chance. In other words, the responsibility belongs to the platforms and the companies creating these systems, not just to individual parents struggling to navigate an environment deliberately engineered to prioritize engagement above everything else. And here's the thing: that criticism is not some fringe theory. It is a widely documented assessment of the social media landscape, backed by substantial research and championed by respected experts, researchers, and yes, even celebrity advocates who have spent years raising the alarm.
Children are no longer just participants in digital spaces. They are too often the product. They didn't know that the platforms valued profit over people. We would never accept a food system that knowingly exposed children to harm.
But Meghan Markle, are you seriously saying, despite that rhetoric, that your 5-year-old daughter is giving you permission to share her image for money? I think there's nothing wrong with parents sharing their children online. But remember, Prince Harry has called it evil. He has attacked parents who are doing exactly what you would do.
She delivered all of this while standing beside the Director General of the WHO, speaking to a room filled with people who actually had the authority and responsibility to act on the issue. The words themselves were right. The cause was real. The risks she described were well documented and supported by substantial evidence. That's not where the controversy begins. The part that left critics shaking their heads came afterward. Not because she was wrong in Geneva, she wasn't. The real problem, according to her critics, is that warning people about a danger only carries lasting weight when your own actions appear connected to the principle you're promoting. The moment that connection starts to look shaky, every carefully chosen sentence begins losing some of its force. Suddenly the focus shifts. Instead of concentrating on the warning itself, the very parents who needed to hear the message start examining the messenger. And once that happens, the conversation is no longer just about the issue. It becomes about whether the person delivering the warning is living by the standard they publicly champion.
Also said she wasn't going to serve her children to the media on a silver platter, specifically Archie. But now we have her serving her children on a silver platter to the same social media companies that she goes around campaigning against for, I guess, that dopamine hit. I am also imagine she is paid per post as an Instagram influencer. I do believe she's probably in that program. So that would be an incentive for her.
That's where the problem starts to snowball. The cause becomes tangled up in the contradiction. And according to critics, the biggest casualty of those 18 days isn't Meghan herself. It's the very cause she stood in Geneva to promote. Every parent who needed to hear that warning clearly, without the distraction of a headline-grabbing contradiction appearing less than 3 weeks later, now has one more reason to question the conversation. The message itself wasn't the issue. The issue was everything that happened afterward. Because when the messenger makes the message harder to accept, people stop focusing on the warning and start focusing on the person delivering it. That's why those 18 days keep coming up. Not because anyone expects perfection, but because the timeline is specific, documented, measurable, and impossible to ignore. The speech happened. The photographs happened. And between them sits a gap of exactly 18 days. If you're enjoying the kind of deep dive analysis other channels tend to gloss over, make sure you hit that like button and stick around for more. Because what happened next is where this story really took off. The birthday photo wasn't what turned this into a major talking point. The response to that photo is what transformed a simple birthday post into a full-blown controversy.
Problem that I have, particularly with this now, or not my personal problem, but why I just think it's incredibly unwise of this couple to do this, is that increasingly at the center of this commercial operation is Lilibet. She is increasingly the cheese, the bait, the whatever you want to call it, to draw people into these photographs.
She didn't disappear and hope the criticism would fade away. She didn't quietly post a follow-up designed to dodge the obvious questions. No, she went in the exact opposite direction, and she did it with remarkable precision. Her team came out swinging before the controversy had even fully arrived. In fact, before the photograph was posted, before the camera had even done its job, a spokesperson for the Duchess had already delivered a prepared statement to Newsweek. The message was clear and carefully constructed. According to the statement, there is a meaningful difference between sharing moments from a parent's life and exposing children to public scrutiny. The argument was straightforward. By keeping the children's faces turned away, Meghan was supposedly doing exactly what she had advocated in Geneva. The children remained protected. The principle remained intact. And to be fair, before tearing that argument apart, it deserves credit for being strategically clever. This wasn't a claim that she suddenly changed her position after Geneva or failed to think through the consequences of her speech. Quite the opposite. The defense argued that the speech and the birthday post were actually the same philosophy in action. The idea was that she wasn't stepping back from the Who stage at all. Instead, she was incorporating the birthday post into the very message she had delivered there. Controlled sharing instead of total invisibility. Deliberate presentation instead of algorithm-driven exposure. A parent controlling the image rather than the platform controlling the narrative. That distinction immediately caught the attention of royal watchers. And then there's Prince Harry, who is impossible to leave out of this particular conversation. Back in 2025, he publicly described major social media platforms as evil and wicked during an appearance on the Hassan Minhaj podcast. Yet only 18 days after Meghan's speech criticizing the impact of those same platforms on children, their daughter appeared on one of them. Critics quickly noticed the tension. On one side, strong public warnings about social media. On the other, active use of social media as a tool for branding and public engagement. Separate issues, perhaps, but running side by side in a way that was difficult to ignore. What made the situation even more striking was the timing. The statement wasn't created after backlash emerged. It wasn't damage control. It was drafted, approved, and delivered before anyone had a chance to react. That suggests anticipation. It suggests awareness. The criticism was expected before the post ever appeared. The answer was already waiting in the public record before the questions arrived. According to critics, that doesn't look like someone accidentally wandering into a contradiction. It looks like someone identifying the contradiction, calculating the risk, and moving forward anyway. Commentators were quick to weigh in. Tom Sykes, who attended the Geneva event in Switzerland, described the birthday photograph as staggeringly tone-deaf. Richard Fitzwilliams, speaking on GB News, accused the Sussexes of relentless self-promotion and described their habit of photographing the children from behind as curious. And that single word carried plenty of weight. Because if someone genuinely wanted their children to be completely invisible online, critics argue the solution is incredibly simple. Don't post them at all. Instead, the photographs appeared carefully curated and strategically released to an audience of roughly 5 million followers. Critics argued that wasn't invisibility, it was presentation. It wasn't absence, it was branding. Brand commentator Nick Eade told Newsweek the entire sequence felt hypocritical, particularly because of the timing. Meanwhile, Claire Cohen of The Independent argued that repeatedly posting images of children, even with faces obscured, may undermine privacy rather than protect it. Importantly, that argument appeared in a national newspaper, not a gossip blog. What stood out wasn't that one person criticized the situation. It was that a royal commentator, a branding expert, and a broadsheet columnist all arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion on the same day while examining the same sequence of events. 3 different perspectives, 3 different professional backgrounds, 3 different deadlines, yet all pointing toward the same concern. And when multiple observers independently land on the same description after reviewing the same facts, critics argue that description starts looking less like coincidence and more like an observation. If you're enjoying this analysis, subscribe to Palace Insider and share your thoughts below. Is the face-away policy a meaningful privacy safeguard, or is it simply the framing that allows the post to happen while softening the criticism that follows? Because the next detail is where the official defense starts facing its toughest challenge, and where the argument becomes much more specific than general. The entire defense essentially hangs on a single word: obscured. The faces are turned away, the argument goes, and therefore privacy remains protected through careful framing. Several outlets accepted that explanation at face value. Newsweek, the New Zealand Herald, and others described the birthday photograph as consistent with the couple's long-standing approach of not clearly showing their children, presenting it as evidence of a policy that had been carefully maintained over time. Then came the complication. Looking at the exact same image, the Daily Mail reached a dramatically different conclusion, calling it the clearest birthday photograph Meghan had ever shared of her daughter. And that's where things get interesting. Put those 2 descriptions side by side for a moment because they create a problem. Both interpretations cannot comfortably exist together. If the image truly preserves privacy in the way the statement suggests, then the Daily Mail's assessment misses the mark. But if the Daily Mail accurately identified it as the boldest image yet, then the foundation of the defense starts looking considerably less secure. The spokesperson's argument relies on the photograph being meaningfully different from an identifying image. Yet one publication specifically examining that issue concluded the opposite. One photograph, 2 completely different readings. And critics argue that the defense works only if people never compare those readings directly. Because once they do, the contradiction becomes difficult to ignore. Either the image represents a carefully maintained privacy standard, or it represents a noticeable shift toward greater visibility. Both claims cannot fully occupy the same space. To be fair, supporters have their own argument, and it deserves consideration. They contend that a single, controlled birthday photograph shared once a year is fundamentally different from the endless algorithm-driven environment Meghan criticized in Geneva. A curated image posted by a parent is not the same thing as a child being immersed in recommendation systems for hours at a time. Through that lens, they argue she is drawing exactly the line she described in Switzerland. Sharing a moment while protecting identity, choosing intentional disclosure instead of uncontrolled exposure. Adding weight to that view, a child welfare expert quoted by Newsweek acknowledged that keeping a face partially hidden does offer practical benefit. An obscured image provides less material for facial recognition systems and may reduce certain privacy risks faced by children of public figures. In that sense, supporters are not making an irrational argument, nor was the expert wrong to point out those distinctions. But critics insist the Geneva speech was never solely about screen time or facial recognition technology. They argue it was about something broader, the gradual transformation of children into content. The concern wasn't merely what children see online, but how children themselves become part of the online ecosystem. According to that perspective, once a child appears within a feed viewed by millions of people, a form of exposure already exists regardless of how carefully the image is framed. And that's why the timeline continues to dominate the discussion. A photograph shared with 5 million followers from the verified account of a globally recognized public figure only 18 days after a speech warning about children's digital exposure still occupies the same online environment she criticized. More polished? Certainly. More controlled? Absolutely. But critics argue it remains part of the very ecosystem at the center of the warning. Supporters may have the stronger intentions. Critics, however, keep pointing back to the calendar. And the calendar still says 18 days. There is another element that keeps resurfacing as well, the broader pattern. Looking across multiple family milestones, critics argue the public-facing privacy standard appears to have moved toward greater visibility rather than less. They point to earlier posts, including public tributes surrounding Archie's birthday, as examples suggesting a gradual increase in what is shared rather than a tightening of boundaries over time. No one forced those decisions. The platform was chosen deliberately. The timing was chosen deliberately. The framing was chosen deliberately. And when observers look at the overall pattern instead of a single birthday post, many conclude the trend has consistently moved toward more visibility, not less. That leads directly to the argument commentator Tom Sykes emphasized most strongly. He described Meghan's Instagram account as a public-facing shop window, and the detail he highlighted added another layer to the discussion. The evening before the Geneva appearance, she posted a behind-the-scenes image captioned, "Mama's Little Helper." Reflected clearly in the mirror was the label of the designer outfit she would wear to the WHO event the following day. The designer outfit she would wear to the WHO summit the very next morning was already making an appearance. So here's the sequence critics keep circling back to. A major speech warning about children's exposure to algorithm-driven platforms was preceded by an Instagram post that doubled as a wardrobe reveal. The Child Safety Summit and the designer label ended up sharing the same news cycle, separated by less than a day. And for critics, that's not a detail they're willing to overlook. The outfit received its preview. The speech received its global platform. The birthday post received its audience of 5 million followers. None of that proves motive, and even critics acknowledge that point. But context matters. The Spotify deal is gone. The Netflix arrangement no longer looks the way it once did. The lifestyle brand is still trying to establish its commercial footing. Those facts don't prove intent, but they do shape how observers interpret every family-related post that follows. Because when a public brand is built around access, familiarity, and personal connection, and previous commercial partnerships have shrunk in importance, the family connection becomes uniquely valuable. It's the one asset that remains entirely tied to the brand itself. Unlike business deals, it cannot be restructured, renegotiated, or replaced. And then came a contrast nobody planned, yet one that landed harder than any commentator's criticism. On the very same Thursday afternoon that Meghan's birthday photographs were appearing on Instagram and discussions about Geneva and the now famous 18 days were spreading across media circles, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was spending her afternoon at a cancer treatment centre in Manchester. She stood beside a 30-year-old patient completing chemotherapy. She watched the woman ring the bell that marks the end of treatment, a moment recognized in cancer centres everywhere and remembered by countless patients for the rest of their lives. Catherine spoke quietly about the emotional reality of the experience, not only for the patient but also for family members forced to watch from the sidelines during some of life's most difficult months. There was no social media strategy attached to the moment. No teaser post the night before. No prepared statement waiting with a publication. No carefully managed comment section switched off afterward. Just one royal woman spending part of a stranger's hardest day standing beside her in person rather than behind a screen. People who follow royal stories noticed the contrast immediately. They always do. And they didn't need a commentator or a press release to explain why. Because this is where the entire debate lands. Put as simply as possible, only 18 days after warning the world that children were being turned into content on the very platforms she uses regularly, Meghan shared what several publications described as the clearest birthday image of her daughter yet. Before the photograph even appeared, her team had already prepared and distributed a defense explaining why it shouldn't be viewed as contradictory. Critics argue she never treated the contradiction as a contradiction at all. The post went live with the explanation already waiting in public view. The criticism had been anticipated, measured, and apparently accepted before publication. A royal commentator, a branding expert, and a broadsheet columnist all used variations of the same criticism. Her own Geneva remarks described exposure as the concern. Tom Sykes called the photograph staggeringly tone-deaf. The Daily Mail called it the clearest image yet. Her spokesperson described it as the most careful. Critics argue both positions cannot comfortably coexist. One interpretation focuses on what the photograph actually showed. The other focuses on what the statement required the photograph to represent in order for the defense to remain intact. Those are not necessarily the same thing. What critics find most significant is that none of this happened by accident. Meghan had spoken on an international stage before officials capable of influencing policy. Her own speech existed in the public record long before the photograph appeared. Any future post touching on the same subject would inevitably be compared against those earlier remarks. The defense was already written, approved, and delivered before publication. The photograph still went live. The explanation was already circulating. The 18-day timeline was already visible. And the criticism was already predictable. That's why critics describe this as one of the most carefully calculated moments of the year. Not because of the photograph alone, but because of the preparation surrounding it. The advanced defense, the anticipated reaction, the deliberate choice to move forward anyway. Presented to millions of followers as something entirely ordinary, a mother celebrating her daughter's birthday. And that brings the argument back to its simplest form. Meghan traveled to Geneva and warned about children becoming content on platforms designed to maximize attention. Then, 18 days later, she shared images of her own child on one of those same platforms. There was no apology because the official position insisted there was nothing to apologize for. The speech and the post were presented as expressions of the same principle. Critics, however, keep returning to the same answer. The answer is the 18 days. Those 18 days are the entire point. They represent the distance between the warning and the action. They are the window in which the principle and the practice appeared to drift apart clearly enough that a royal commentator, a branding expert, and a broadsheet columnist all independently arrived at the same criticism. And before we wrap this up, there's one final point that deserves attention. The strongest pushback against this kind of analysis comes from people who argue that holding public advocates to a perfectly consistent standard is unfair. They point out that nobody lives flawlessly according to every principle they promote, and that demanding total consistency can make advocacy so difficult that it discourages people from speaking out at all. That's a legitimate argument, and it applies across politics, entertainment, activism, and public life generally. But critics insist that isn't really the issue here. Their focus isn't years of social media activity. It isn't a long career of public advocacy mixed with occasional contradictions. It isn't even the broader pattern of family posts. It's the 18 days. The speech happened. The photographs happened. And they happened close enough together that the timeline itself became the story. Had the birthday fallen 6 months before Geneva or 6 months afterward, critics argue the conversation would likely look very different. The speech and the photographs would not be viewed through the same lens. They would not occupy the same frame. The direct comparison would never have become unavoidable. That's why the number keeps returning to the center of the debate. The proximity matters. The measurable gap matters. The fact that both events occurred within such a short period is what transforms this from a broad observation about imperfect public figures into a specific case people continue to discuss. Almost every public figure falls short of their stated ideals at some point. That's hardly unique. What makes this situation different, according to critics, is that the sequence is visible, documented, and easy to follow. Meghan stood in Geneva and warned about a specific danger involving children and digital exposure. She delivered that message to people positioned to influence policy and address the issue at a systemic level. Then, 18 days later, she posted content involving her own child on the very type of platform she had just criticized. For critics, the calendar isn't a harsh standard. It's simply the timeline. It's the record of what happened and when it happened. They argue it doesn't require complicated interpretation. It only requires placing both events next to each other and reading them in order. So now the question shifts to you. Does the face-away policy genuinely separate the birthday post from the concerns raised in Geneva? Does careful framing create a meaningful distinction? Or do those 18 days tell a different story no matter how the photographs are presented? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this debate isn't ending anytime soon. And if you enjoy deep dive royal analysis that goes beyond the headlines, make sure you subscribe to Palace Insider and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and allows us to keep producing this kind of analysis. Until next time.